We know that a certain amount of climate impacts are now locked in, and our communities are going to be faced with more frequent and intense disasters like fire, floods, storms and heat waves. So we're going to explore today how strong relationships within our local communities and with the places we live in can help build our resilience to climate disasters. How the collective wisdom of everyday people can inform how we face this new reality, and how community-led work might also help us transform the systems we live under to meet our needs and to address the root causes of climate change. So we're going to hear from each of our speakers for about 6 minutes each, and then we'll have a bit of a panel discussion, and then we will have time for questions from the audience as well. So jot down the questions as we go, if that helps you out. The first speaker I'm going to introduce is from an organisation that co-produced an incredible research report on disaster resilience called Care Through Disaster. Amanda Kelly is the CEO of Women's Health Goulburn North East, a feminist organisation based in North East Victoria. She's invested in embedding feminist values and practice into all of her work and taking back care as a fundamental part that is at the heart of all we do. Welcome, Amanda. Because you kick us off.
Oh, okay. Hello. Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's really lovely to be here, everybody. So, as Kim said, I'm with Women's Health Goulburn North East. We're one of 12 women's health organisations funded by the Victorian Government to deliver health promotion and primary prevention in Victoria. So our particular service operates across 12 local government areas in regional Victoria, and we work with an intersectional feminist framework and to address gender and health inequalities. And just to note that when we talk about women, we include trans and cisgender women, as well as gender diverse people who identify with the female experience regardless of sex assigned at birth. So my organisation works on systemic change. We know that while each woman has agency to make her own decisions, her agency is impacted by the systems that surround us. So as an organisation, we've developed 5 aspirations that centre our work, and the main one of those that I want to talk about today is care. This work in centering care led us to the national organisation Australia Renamed. We first encountered them when they were researching their work, reclaiming our purpose. It's time to talk about the public good. So Australia Renamed's research found that there are a handful of basic goods and services that people want to be available to everyone. These come up time and time again in every conversation in every group, regardless of people's socio-economic resources, location, cultural background, or political leanings. That's housing, healthcare, education, jobs, access to nature, and access to the internet. But going deeper, Australia Renamed distilled this into 3 core things: the opportunity to connect with each other and with place, pathways to contribute locally and nationally to who we are as communities and as a nation, and the ability to care and be cared for. So this was a partnership that was made to work together to better understand how we can centre care through disaster. But this wasn't where it started. So during the 2019 bushfires, one of the local councils in North East Victoria set up 2 refuges that welcomed people from across all the local government areas in the region that had either been displaced or were at risk of being displaced. So the refuges were really well run, had space to sleep, had relief agencies present to offer support, there was space for animals from local farms, there were supplies that had been donated across the country. My organisation was invited to visit the centres and asked to provide feedback on how they were run and how inclusive they were. So I've just got to give real props to the local council that invited us in to give that feedback. So after we went and visited, and then after the crisis had passed and the recovery was in its early stages, we talked to people who had used the service and hadn't used the service, and also those that managed the refuges. So here's a brief summary of what we found through those discussions, along with our own observations. So one of the things is that the refuges provided much needed support for people across several communities. People had shelter, food, could in many cases have space for their livestock and pets, were able to access financial and emotional assistance immediately. Excuse me. So as we walked through the refuges, one of the things we noticed, there was a really strong army presence there. The army had come to help with relocation, to help with the work. But what we noticed was that with such a high presence and a number of people who have come from refugee and migrant communities, there was a threat there, or a perceived threat there. There may have been uncomfortableness with being displaced from home and then in a camp, and having the army around particularly. So that's one of the observations we fed back to them. The other thing that we found was that the people who ran the refuges, particularly the local council, had planned, had organised, had done a lot of work, and the army came in and told them to do things differently, told community to do things differently. Now, that's what they were being told to do, that was their jobs, but it was at odds with what the community actually needed at the time. One of the other things we noticed was that there was sleeping arrangements, there was really, everything was fresh and clean, and there was lots of beds and that sort of thing. But, if you're in a same-sex relationship, sleeping together in a public space, in a room with lots of other people, could be extremely uncomfortable. There may be people who've been walking down the street or who have made you unwelcome in the community. So I think I don't probably need to go into that any further, but we can see what the issues are there. One thing that really struck us was that, and we were not present for this, but we heard firsthand a story of someone who had been displaced, was in the refuge and had a panic attack. And the people that were there around them didn't really understand the panic attack, but they were trying to help, they were trying to calm them down. And the person got more and more agitated, and they ended up accidentally hitting someone. Someone else saw that and called the police. And so this person had to deal with the police, of course, it distressed them even further. So the end result was they did get support that they needed, but they had to go through a horrible experience. So, oh my goodness, thank you. Oh my gosh, okay. So one thing that became very clear to us is that individuals care. So this work that we've been doing with Australia Remade, so I'm jumping around a little bit, people care, so we're not trying to tell people how to care. What we're trying to do is reclaim care as an integral part of how we work and what we do. So I'm going to jump right through we basically looked at a number of recommendations on different levels, from individuals to community, local government, state government and federal government. So one of the things I just want to give a really fantastic example in community that happened is in the King Valley in New South Wales. They have, the Kangaroo Valley in New South Wales. They have about 30 local resilience groups, and those groups were formed out of the CFA. One of the CFA long-term volunteers said, things aren't matching up here, people aren't communicating, we're not getting across what we need. And so he worked with the community for a long time to get these resilience groups going, and when fires came through again, no one lost their lives, everybody was safe, everybody looked after each other. So that's one of the things that our Care Through Disaster work has highlighted, and that we want to look at. But the main thing that we want to say is that there are systemic problems that get in the way of care. So when I jump all the way up to the federal government, what we're really interested in the federal government doing is building the capacity for citizen disaster relief and considering a civilian disaster relief corps rather than an army one. Harness, obviously, I think we'll all go for this one, harness the government for the wellbeing of people and planet by bringing a long-term lens to our challenges, focusing on prevention and public good. And then the final one is shifting from from private to public disaster insurance, so that when something occurs, people do not have to go through the private system. In the northeast of Victoria, there are many organisations, businesses and people who can't actually get insurance at all anymore. And it's really undermining the health and well-being of our communities there. So, again, jumping right through, a key part of this work is to know that the work of building community and connections is real work. That's actually work. It takes time, it takes effort, but it is so undervalued and underappreciated. There isn't a single policy fix. We see that putting a care lens is the only way that we can move forward together. We have some cards there to have a look at it. I did really well. It's on fully recycled paper, ink that's safe, and the QR codes have run out. So I feel like that's a capitalist sort of undermining of this system that we have here. So please Google and have a look at the research reports, and thank you very much.
Looking forward to digging into your work a little more. Our next speaker is Shweta Dakin, a manager of resilient communities at GenWest. GenWest is a gender violence support service that also delivers programs to support migrant and refugee communities in Melbourne West to lead safe and healthy lives. So she'll be speaking on her experiences of community-led work and exploring strength-based solutions.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Yeah. Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Shweta, and as mentioned by Kim, I work with GenWest, which is also a women's health service like the organisation Amanda is representing, but we work in Melbourne's West, so the 7 LGAs in Melbourne's West, and our vision is to achieve gender equity in Melbourne's West. You've already heard from Amanda about the beautiful work all the women's health services do, so I won't get into that, but the one thing that makes GenWest a little different is we also work in response. So we are a women's health service which works in primary prevention but also response to family violence. As part of the prevention work that we do, we work on a lot of diverse things like sexual and reproductive health for women, mental health and well-being. But one of the key things which is relevant to this platform is we work on supporting women impacted by climate change, emergency and disaster situations. As part of the work and the team that I work with, we have a program called Multilingual Health Education. This program is very peer-based, so the workforce is women from the community, and we work in language, specifically to provide migrant and refugee women health education and prevention of violence education. So the way we work is we are from the community and we work for and with the community. We create safe spaces, we speak to the community in language, and we create culturally safe environments for women to educate themselves and build their capacity. As part of that, we were very fortunate to, fortunate is an interesting word. I do feel we were fortunate to be able to work with the Maribyrnong community after the devastating flood of October 2022. And when we were approached and we got some funding by the government to work on that, we decided to follow that model of working with migrant and refugee communities, especially because they are the ones who don't get as heard after a disaster, and we decided to use the same model. So in language, culturally safe, and looking at the demographics of Maribyrnong, we specifically worked a lot with the Vietnamese and Indian communities. The program was called Our Community, Our Voice. We worked with Vietnamese and Indian bicultural workers, and the main aim of the program was to provide support in flood recovery to women from those communities. This is one of our reports. I don't have to handle all these papers, but this is the report that we, somebody that's ready, who is our project lead, and that's the report. I wanted to actually read from it, so I am going to read from it. This report, basically, we spoke to women from migrant and refugee backgrounds who were impacted by the floods. And the first thing it says here is, there was no previous warning to prepare. Who looks at the phone at 4 a.m. in the morning? On the other side of the lights, they knocked at everyone's doors and asked them to get out. But for this side of the lights, they didn't tell anyone to take their things or prepare to leave. No warning was given until the last minute. Within 2 seconds, I had to tell my husband to get out of the shower because a lady said that we had to leave. That's how it started for this community, right, very close to where we are actually. Working with them and really diving into the stories and the experience of these communities was a huge learning for us. We learned from them. And what we realized was that they had a lot of barriers in accessing services. So services were there, but they could not access those services. They could not navigate those services. And it really highlighted to us that there is still huge gaps in our approach to disaster management. Giving those learnings from this community and what we have become is even more determined to continue to work with communities from a gendered lens and cultural lens to really look at the impact of climate change, but specifically in urban settings. Because urban settings are very different to rural settings, as we all can understand. To give an example, we are continuing the work we did in Maribyrnong. So we've learned from the community in Maribyrnong, and what we've been lucky enough to do is secure funding to take those learnings and take them to other LGAs. We got funded to work in Mindom and Melton, where we will now work in preparing the community so they don't ever have to go through what the Maribyrnong community went through. So we're taking our learnings and using them in other LGAs. I mentioned urban settings, and I think it is very important to really realize how different they are to rural settings. For example, in Melbourne's West, we have very unique challenges. We are a very diverse community, but we also face very fast-paced housing development. We have a lack of green spaces and shelters, and also a relatively high percentage of low socioeconomic status cohorts, especially in Melbourne's West. As Amanda mentioned, if you are from a migrant and refugee background, you have experiences of migration, you have experiences of forced displacement, which leads to, you might not always be able to access a service, you might not be able to understand how to access a service. But most importantly, for urban settings, you face a certain amount of isolation and there's not that much community cohesion. Like, I don't think I actually truly know my neighbors. If you ask me, like, do I really know my neighbors living in an urban setting? And that's something that came out during the floods. After the floods in Maribyrnong, a lot of the community shared that they now know their neighbors because they came together after the disaster, but they didn't know their neighbors before the disaster. And that's not what we want to do. We want to know our neighbors before a disaster. Almost there. So just to say that, communities like Melbourne's West or diverse communities have very unique challenges, and then you add an urban setting to it, the challenge is even more unique. If you're from a migrant and refugee background, that's another level to consider. What we say and what we have noticed is that a very effective approach is to use a community-led model, use a peer-based model. We have huge untapped wisdom, knowledge, and resilience within our diverse communities. Communities know what they need, and migrant and refugee communities and communities from diverse backgrounds bring huge knowledge to our existing society. Let us use those untapped skills and strengths of our community in mitigating these effects of climate change. We can ensure workforce diversity, we can work with trusted community leaders, and I love this idea of who is the community leader? How do we recognize the community leader? Is it the person we see the most? Is it the loudest voice in the room? Or is it actually somebody people go to? They'll be hidden, they'll be invisible, and most of the time it's women. So let's find those people on ground who are actually leading the work and build their capacity. Let's support them. Let's leverage their strength. And when we work with community, when we leverage their community strength, we build a more climate resilient society. Thank you for listening to me, and I look forward to Thank you so much.
That's incredible work. The next speaker I want to introduce is Brendan Kennedy from Tati Kaiejin. an Indigenous-owned organisation that reconnects First Nations people to their waterways and country. Brendan is a river country man from the Murray River and Murrumbidgee River First Nations. He's a leading advocate for First Nations
Rights to water and country, for Tati Nation sovereignty,
and community self-determination. Brendan has been reviving culture and language for many years, and in his roles as Aboriginal Water Officer and Kaiejin Culture Engagement Officer, he has been engaged in efforts to achieve cultural flow, healthy water flowing across country and back into the Murray's floodplains and lagoons. Welcome, Brendan. We'd love to hear about your work.
Thank you, Patrick. Just want to pay respect to the traditional owners of the country we're on, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and the Goulburn. They've never seen this on me. And they are the first climate scientists, or the first of everything actually. But yeah, first climate scientists. And, it's quite ironic we're sitting in a colonial type structure discussing climate issues around it. So it's quite interesting. But yeah, so I just want to pay respect to the ancestors of this country, their creation stories. As you know, the area we are in is now what's called Naarm. But actually Naarm is it's the land that's underwater in the bay. That when the sea level was lower, there was more land out there, so that was Naarm. But yeah, so I'm part of the Confederation of Nations, 20 nations in the southern part of the Murray Basin. We have been campaigning for water rights for the First Nations in this country. And for Mother Earth. And I come from a maternal Moiti system from mother's line or grandmother's line, for Mother Earth. And we have our grandmother trees, we have all of our stories have a maternal mother and sister and daughter and a female system, kinship. But it's interesting, there's a saying that's called the squeakiest wheel gets the oil, and that's Mother Earth. And Mother Earth is getting very squeaky and loud, and because she needs to be nourished. And it's interesting in this country how we've been continue to be dispossessed, and the colonial project is in full swing. 240, 50 years now in full swing, so we're now living in a colonial wasteland, and that's at full tilt, full steam ahead. And the mission statement is go forward and destroy the environment and make money and use all the natural resources that are here and just take it, use it, and don't think about the future. And that's the climate project. We're all a part of that. And that's something we need to start to change for our future generations after us, because there will be people that will be living after us, by the way. We're not just here, our lives, and it's all over. There will be descendants and future generations that need to live in a healthy environment. Australia, for example, is responsible for 40% of the world's native species loss, extinction, and sits at number 2 in the world, but the number 1 is Indonesia. They've had hundreds of years head start. So Australia, we've only been really killing and the environment really, it's only really been in full swing for the last 3/4 of a century. So it's not a long time that the colonial project has really been destroying and eroding and degrading this landscape. The oldest landscape in the world, by the way. We don't come from Africa. There's a news flash for you all. We don't come from Africa, by the way. We come from here. Our First Nations people. We are the oldest people on this planet. we have our creation stories and our what we call talagata, or you anglicise it into the dreaming or the dream time or whatever. But so yeah, I am people ask me what I do. I say I'm a traditional owner first. I'm a rights holder. I have rights to country. I inherit rights to lands and water, and that's been my inheritance has been taken away from me since 1788, and many hundreds of thousands of First Nations people. And so, we're talking about the climate, the Mother Earth, but it's the people as well. The children of Mother Earth, and I've done many paintings about Mother Earth, and Mother Earth is not happy with its children, the human children, by the way. And who knows how long us humans have been here, but the animals have been here longer than us, and it's their world as well. Birds and animals and plants and fish and the water itself and the air, the environment. That's been here a lot longer than us, and we've only been here for a short time if you think about how old Mother Earth is. So as First Nations people, we feel like we're trying to lead the way to care for our country. We've been ignored for so long because of capitalism and colonialism. But we're still here, and how we've survived is there's a reason why First Nations people are still here, to help everyone. When I grew up in the country towns, there were Aussies, Aboriginals, Greeks and Italians, but now we live in a community where there's 80 cultures. So we embrace multiculturalism, First Nations people, and we're not, the governments will try and scaremonger all of you all into thinking we're coming to take your land back or your farm off you, but if you can show me one First Nations person that has said, I want to take your land off you, I'll give you my card. But no, that's not the case at all. I've never heard any Aboriginal person say we're coming to take someone's farm off them. We know what it's like to be dispossessed, and that's one of the cruelest things you can do to a group of people is to tell them to get up, pack up and move, otherwise we'll help you move and we'll move you from existence. So we're currently on our way to Sydney. We're taking the Goulburn to court, federal court, Minister of the Environment. And she's not much of a minister, to be honest. But this is around water rights. So, I attended there was a forum, Climate Water National Water for Futures Forum, 10 years ago. One of the scientists got up from Melbourne University and said by 2050 most of Victoria is going to start looking like that sort of northwest New South Wales. And like Cobar and northwest New South Wales is going to look like Central Australia by 2090, and Victoria is going to be starting to look semi-arid. So that really scared me as a First Nations person, and that's where we're heading. That's based on the climatic data that's been collected over the last 120 years. Where we're heading for dry times in the future, less water. So that's really, I've never forgotten that. That's really, instigated me into the water space. But I hope our society in this country and in other parts of the world start to. We now know climate change is right on us, and we have to adapt and change, because what's been happening is it's not going to sustain the human race and all of our. So it's so sad, there are species that I've never seen in my life. They've now gone, and there are species that are here now that future generations are not going to see. So then it's up to us while we're here to do what we can. So thank you.
Our final speaker is Kate Fawcett, who is the convener of the DisasterWISE Communities Network. She's also a person with lived experience on a climate disaster event, the Black Saturday fires of 2009. She's an advocate of localised, community-led and place-based disaster preparedness, response, recovery and renewal. Welcome, Kate.
There's not even a buzzer, it's really confusing.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thanks, everyone. It's really hard to follow such confident speakers, and I've already confessed to a few of you that I'm probably the world's worst public speaker, so bear with me. I am going to talk about my lived experience, so just as a bit of a trigger warning for those that have been impacted, which is many of us, unfortunately. I'd just like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We're all gathering today. Yesterday marked 16 years since the Black Saturday bushfires, and it was a deeply significant day for my community. On February 7th, we suffered unimaginable loss. Sorry. Brings up all sorts of emotions every time I talk about it. Of 130 homes in Strathclyde, 85 were destroyed, along with our school, the hall, the sports pavilion, and all the surrounding bushlands. Many animals perished, and 27 people lost their lives in our community alone. So in the weeks that followed, we were faced with what communities have described as a second wave of trauma, when decisions about our future and the future of Strathclyde were being made by authorities and government with no input from community. And after everything we'd lost, this loss of control and agency and hope in shaping our future was another devastating blow. But what happened next was integral to our community's renewal. The residents came together and held meetings, making collective decisions about how we could lead our own recovery in our own way. Strathclyde was a connected community before the fires, and those relationships, that social capital, became our greatest strength in our response and recovery. People knew who had what. Small towns, everyone knows each other's business, and so sometimes it's a good thing. We knew who had what, who had the skills to help, and just as importantly, who needed support. I now know this to be mutual aid, but at the time it was quite a radical approach, and we were simply doing what needed to be done with what we had. Early on, we made a deliberate choice that we would set our own priorities, even if they didn't fit neatly into a government template or funding criteria. We formed an association to manage our own charitable funds on behalf of the community, and which gave us the power to say no to things that didn't serve our purpose. And this also created a space for community to heal on our own terms. The Strathclyde Community Renewal Association was created not just as an organisation, but as a process that ensured every voice was heard. We co-designed the association rules, held a democratic election with the support of local council and the Australian Electoral Commission, and later shared this model with the Mallacoota community after the Black Summer Fire. With community-led decisions, we secured funding for a temporary gathering space, a portable building, so we could bring people together to connect, to share meals and stories, and have a shower, a cuppa, and for comfort and support. We ran workshops to reflect on what we valued before the fires and how we could rebuild, not just to restore what was lost, but to imagine something new. We built stronger infrastructure, so fire hoses, pumps, renewable energy systems, places to gather and remember. And we re-established our primary school, where today the students are learning about fire awareness, and not just the risks, but also a deep love and connection of where we live in partnership with the CFA. Local co-ops were established, like the Stringy Bark Nursery, which propagated Indigenous plants to regenerate properties in the bushland, and working groups were established over time which drove health and wellbeing initiatives, community events, weekly dinners and art projects. So we learned that climate adaptation isn't just about physical infrastructure, it's about decision making. It's about deepening our connection to country, about nurturing our strengths and skills and knowledge that already exists within our communities. As devastating as Black Saturday was, Strathclyde emerged as a strong and connected community. We saw firsthand the power of communities defining their own priorities and leading leading their own process with collaboration and care. I can't help but think what the outcomes would have been had the community not stepped up and led at this critical time. So, years later, an opportunity arose to convene a community-led learning network, seeded by the Father Forest program, aiming to build community resilience across Australia. The network is now known as DisasterWISE, and it was co-designed by people with lived and learned experience. And together we recognised the strain on overburdened systems that could not cope with more frequent and intense disasters. We also recognised that learnings from one disaster were not necessarily shaping the response for the next, and that network could create opportunities to influence policy and practice. Together we're building a growing movement of people who are building disaster resilience through self-determination and community-led action. It's an inclusive space for learning and unlearning, a place of connection where varying ways of knowing are shared and community voices are amplified. So we invite you to join the movement so we can work together to combat the severity of climate change and the impact it's having on our communities before, during and long after the disaster event. Thank you.
The vulnerability there and sharing the lived experience. I actually live very near Marysville at one time in our country, and it was very eerie coming down here to talk about this yesterday, because that community was also impacted by that Saturday. So it is it's 16 years later, it's really awesome. Thank you. I want to talk a little bit more about the power of relationships. In each of your talks, you've talked about really strong connected communities as disaster resilience infrastructure. And whether that's relationships in communities so that they can support each other to not hit those same barriers that you experienced in the floods, or whether it's our relationships emerging from disaster and strengthening it. And I also want to hear Brendan as well about relationship to place and how First Nations know their country throughout time and how that relationship to place can also build our resilience. So I'll leave it to each of you to jump in with your thoughts, but just a little bit more on the strength of interpersonal relationships and relationship with place.
I think it was interesting that the differences that have been highlighted between rural and metro communities and those connections. I grew up in a metro area, and when I first moved into a rural area, I was in Wangaratta, and it took me months to get used to the fact that everybody knew. It's a 25,000, population. Everybody knew who I was because I'd come to lead this organisation that had been there for a long time. And people knew when I left for work in the morning, and when I, so it was, and then I was asked, well, I don't have children. Are you bringing children with you when you move up? And, is these things happening? And what I started to understand was the different experience of living regionally to living in metro. And so it did, and so I was there for 3 months, and then we had the 2019-20 bushfires, and then we got locked down for COVID. So I didn't get to really experience, to go more deeply into the community at that time because we were locked away from each other. But what I saw and what I was welcomed into was the community that was attempting to hold us all together in that space. So I think, I see that as you said, Kat, sometimes it's like, really? You really know that I was washing my dishes at 6 o'clock last night because you walked past and looked in my window? That's called stalking, really. But no, it's called community in rural communities. So, I think that there's those things to build on, and as you say, Shweta, waiting, it's not like we're waiting for something to happen. But when I lived in Melbourne, I didn't know who my neighbours were. Wouldn't have known who to go to if there was an issue. where I am now, we lived, there was a terrible, with the storms that happened, I don't know, was it before the floods or after the flood, you know, like terrible storms happened. We were locked in our road, we couldn't get out. One of the neighbours came down and said, can you bring your tractor out and you know, cut down the tree that blocked the road. You know, it was wonderful. Everyone knew we had a tractor, someone who could drive it, someone else had a chainsaw, you know, it's great. So I think it's building on that now. Like getting to know people now is the most important thing that we can do.
Yeah, thank you. Shweta, did you want to talk a little bit more about that? Because you're talking about identifying community leaders too. Yes, go for it, Brendan.
I'm always thinking you have to know your past, to know your present, to know for your future. So for me, we think past. I think we have the Maribyrnong, the river, that's got its name. Birrun's got its name. Yuyang's got its name. Gadigal's got its name. Mungo. These have these places have meaning, and they have their name and meaning and people and all the animals, and there is an ancestral spiritual being in place, Mother Earth. There is the energy from Mother Earth that's all across country, all across the world. And there's an elder up in the Barkindji up in the Darling River, the Barker, talks about, and in European sense you call it the rainbow serpent, but we call it Nachi. And Nachi is that snake, that serpent, travels underground. And these are where the waterways are. Those groundwater systems and springs. And they refer to, or he particularly, named Badger Bates, he refers to their Nachi as, has a relationship to the Loch Ness serpent in Scotland. So, when we talk about place, I mean, if you're living in the CBD in Melbourne and you're just thinking about that place and now, then it's what you're going to know going forward. The modern, fast-moving, people to place to the modern humans technology. But we know that the world is a lot more than that. Hence we're seeing bushfires. But I'm from the Murray River, and that's the European name. And Milu is the river, U is the third person suffix. This is my linguistic background. I'm talking about the third person to you. Milu. So there's a person, an ancestor being. I went to New Zealand a couple of years ago. We made a movie over there. It's just out in Australia now. Good Eye on the River, and it's about the Wanganui River, first river in the world. The Wanganui has personhood. So it now has legal rights as a living being, a person, ancestor, and that's what country is, and that's what place is. And our people from millennia have had names and stories and context for places, and real meanings. Hence we have the Bunurong and Wurundjeri have the creation story for the bay. Their bay here. So yeah, don't think about now. I am from the past. We all are from the past, by the way. Your DNA is so old. You weren't born in 1968, and then you suddenly appeared, and away you go, and when we finish up 50 years later, that's not a thing. The thing is, you've been on a journey, you've been travelling, your spirit and your DNA has been moving through time for millions and millions of years, and you are here and you'll continue to move forward into a future time. And it's the same with our natural world. So, yeah, our people to place, it's a lot more than just, we've got to remember we're talking in English now, a very limited form of communication. So we have to continue to be aware of the context that we are in.
Thanks, Brendan. Comparing the country into the future, especially as climate change is changing that landscape, how does Tati Nation's relationship to that place sort of aid you in looking after that place?
Oh, we're just trying to survive first. I mean, I might be very nice with it, but we are just surviving. People pass away during the week. We're burying people all the time. So we're just surviving, but also have this massive responsibility for our country. And, you know, look, in this continent, there's about 1 billion people that have been buried here. Yeah, there's been 1 billion people at least that have existed on this continent. In whatever it is, 200,000 years, 250,000 years. So those people are in the landscape. So we have that massive responsibility. That's why we really get up in arms when there is destruction to our natural world, because this is where our ancestors are. And so that's what we do, Tati. And we put most of the eggs in one basket, water, because we see water as being, you know, we can't change, but Tati, we can't change what's happening to our climate apart from the cultural burnings. When we burn country, it rains. So, you know, putting back the trees, because where the trees are, that's where the rain's going to drop. Much of this state has been cleared, so therefore it can't rain there. So we've got to go back and burn those grasses that have now overtaken country so that some rain can come down and then we can replant and restore country. So that's doing that as well as trying to survive. I mean, I'm 57 now. I'm way past. Everyone knows I was born. So I'm bucking the trend in terms of the statistics. I shouldn't be here. So, but yeah, I'm not planning on being a statistical colonial project statistic. I'll be around for a long time. But yeah, so that's what we're doing as First Nations people. There's only 50,000 of us in Victoria. Not a big population, 3%. But, yeah, we're really fighting hard to care for all of country. And with that comes a responsibility for all people and all species.
Let's talk a little bit about preparing for disaster, because I mean, we hear from your story, Kate, that often during an emergency these community networks come together, and it's often the catalyst of one of my favourite books by Rebecca Solnit, Paradise Built in Hell, finds that in all sorts of disasters, community coming together seems to be our default setting, and it can bring out these really beautiful efforts of solidarity. But we're also talking about before that there are these barriers that exist, and that preparing ahead of time can be really, really important. Shweta, I know that disaster is actually correlated with gender and family violence and things as well, and it can, so preparing by doing that slow work, as you've called it before, Amanda, establishing a relationship, connecting those community members ahead of time can really build resilience as well. I'd love to hear from each of you about how doing that work ahead of time can really pay off.
It boils down to something my colleague Wendy is sitting here, and she says this to me all the time, and this is our catchphrase: resilient communities is the way to combat climate disaster and climate change. If a community is resilient and cohesive, you've got your foundation to combat any disaster and climate change, and that's, I think, the foundation of going forward. Disasters have taught us that when a community is resilient, their recovery is definitely faster. But when a community, like in urban settings, is not cohesive, it takes much longer for the community to recover and come back together. So that's like the foundation, it's like the key ingredient in bringing, in mitigating climate change and its disaster. Learning from the Maryborough community, as Amanda pointed, the key difference between rural and urban settings, that was that key piece missing. The community wasn't cohesive. The community hadn't been brought together before. There was connection to land, but it was an individual connection to land. Everybody we spoke with was very connected to their land, like especially the Vietnamese communities have beautiful gardens, and they're very connected to the river, but it was an individual connection. It wasn't a collective connection to land. And after the disaster, we did, for example, a gardening working bee project, and we brought community together in different people's gardens. So you're not just working in your garden, you are going and rebuilding gardens of your neighbors. And that is a collective connection to land. And that's what kind of rebuilds the community. And that learning can be taken now into communities who don't have that resilience, and bring them together to mitigate climate change, so that tomorrow if a disaster comes, which it will, because we've now called it upon ourselves, we're not escaping it, the community is ready.
Thank you so much. We're getting a bit of a time check, so I might just direct two more quick questions, one to Amanda and one to Kate. We were talking a lot about how the community-driven work is what builds that resilience, and often top-down intervention can make things worse. But Amanda, in your research piece, you've actually looked at citizens, community groups, local government, state government and federal. While we do want that community-grounded and community-driven work, can you tell us why it's important to, in terms of how we resource this work and stuff, maintain a relationship with those other institutions, even if we're really trying to encourage them to redesign what they exist to serve?
It is really important because when I think about, for example, local council, I know that often we don't have great experiences with local council, but local council are the closest to us. So our activism and our thinking needs to, I think we need to be able to speak to them, and we need to be able to not set up that oppositional thing to them. So when they're being difficult and oppositional and hard to deal with, it's then coming back again, and I guess that's where some of the resilience comes in. But also our local councils are here to serve us. And sometimes they forget that because of the pressures that are on them, particularly they have a lot of legislative pressures, a lot of financial pressures on them. So it's about working with them wherever we can. And sometimes that's really hard and frustrating and horrible, and you just want to go away. But also, our state government and our federal government, they are there to serve us. Now, we know that our capitalist system, our colonial approach, it doesn't allow for that. Like it says, no, you must do what we say, and it's all for money. But the fact is we can change that. So it is really important to keep those connections going and to push for the things that can fundamentally change us. So one of the things we've talked about is the 4-day work week. That provides space for people to then connect in other ways. So, living within the community, living within the system that we have, but changing it and shifting it in what may appear to be small ways, but can have really profound effects.
Thank you. And, we're talking a lot about community empowerment and the strength of connecting within your community, but Kate, DisasterWISE actually connects communities that are geographically separate. Can you tell us how sharing learnings and knowledge and sharing different lived experience can build our resilience as a larger community?
I think that community, what we're learning from one another is really valuable, because we've all had our own separate lived experience, and even though those climate disasters can look quite different in varying community contexts, the underlying learning that we're hearing from one another is that communities have sort of developed a reliance model on these colonial structures that have been enforced on people, and it's a matter of stepping into the power and saying, actually, let's do this ourselves. We have the skills in community to be able to do this already. So the importance of knowing your neighbours, we were just discussing at the store before. Know your neighbours, you don't have to like them, you just need to know them. And knowing what skills are already available in your community is really going to help drive recovery particularly. But I know from sharing between communities, we're hearing very similar things. Top-down approaches don't work, siloed approaches aren't working, communities just become more disgruntled and, you know, disenfranchised by these systems that are in place that aren't serving us. So we just have to create our own system.
Thank you so much. And I'll just leave us with one more question to Brendan. You know, we are talking about, at the end of the day, colonial and capitalist systems that are getting in the way of sovereignty, self-determination and care for country. I've heard you in one of your videos speak about the regulatory systems of the Murray. They're actually like cutting off a part of your body. I'd just love to hear from you about what restoring relationships between First Nations people and their country can mean for the country as a whole, and that vision for a more holistic way of relating to place.
Look, we're all missing out on so much. You know, the ignoring of First Nations people, particularly in this country, I think we've all been, like, it's disadvantaged us all, to be honest, and it's been such a, it's been a real tragedy, I believe, particularly interacting with a lot of kids that want to know, that want to care for the environment, and they want to know everything about the environment, and who better than to learn from than a group of people that have been here for a race of people for over 100,000 years. So when we, you know, as I said, we've had people pass away during the week, but when we lose an elder, when we lose any individual that's part of a storyline, songline, history and culture and kinship for so long, 100,000 years of knowledge, to ignore that is, it's one of the saddest things that I know, to be honest. And so in terms of the climate and stuff around the water, so water is a living being. Water is a living entity. It moves across country, and it's akin to, in our culture, we have ancestral people and landscapes, animals, and ancestral beings in country. Hence, that's why places that are named after a particular ancestral being's body part. So when you stop water travelling from those areas, it's like the veins now. You stop blood flowing through your body to a particular part of your body, then you lose that body part, that limb, and that's what's happening to country by not allowing that water to move to because country needs water, and that's not happening. That's being prevented. Water's being used, it's been treated as a non-life form. Can't treat water as though it's not a living thing. Water is a living life form. And so water, that's how water's being treated in this country. And, that's not good for all of us, by the way. As people, that's not, we can't be healthy, we can't be a healthy people, species, without a healthy Mother Earth. And so water is something to that.
Water is life. Thank you. So we did start a little bit late, but we're going to wrap up with maybe just one or two questions for the audience. If anyone's got something burning that they want to ask the panel. Yeah, go for it.
Two quick questions. First question is, what's the film about the river that you're talking about?
It's called I Am the River and the River is Me.
Okay, beautiful, thank you. My other one was, are there specific things that you think we needed to learn but we haven't learned that you could share?
That's a really big question. I don't know if I can do that justice. I think the answer is in decentralising power structures and decolonising practice and working together because the whole is better than some of its parts.
Has anyone else got a question for the panel?
Brazilian. I have a saying, very short, that came to me when there was a lot going on in my family in the US many years ago. Start where you are to get where you go.
Yeah, that's a good one. Does anyone have anything to build on? Might be a nice way to leave it then. Thank you so much for our wonderful panel's time. Can everyone give them a round?